really need a Minister for Men?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, airports and ports have been informed after a terror suspect went on the run from prison. 21-year-old Daniel Abed Khalif had been awaiting trial at HMP Wandsworth in London when he escaped this morning. LBC's Chris Golds has more.
It's understood the 21-year-old managed to get out of prison by hanging onto or being strapped onto the underside of a food delivery van, but police refusing to confirm that tonight. We do know he was working in the prison kitchens at the time and may have been dressed in a chef's uniform. Commander Dominic Murphy, head of the Met's counter-terrorism command, has told LBC an alert has been issued to all ports and airports.
We're getting great support from city policing colleagues and policing generally. But of course, yes, we have gone to borders, provided his picture and put an appeal out for him to be stopped and rearrested.
Members of the public are urged not to approach Daniel Khalif if they spot him and have been told to call 999 immediately. Chris Golds, LBC, New Scotland Yard.
The Children's Commissioner has told LBC we're talking years if schools need to be rebuilt as a result of unsafe concrete. LBC understands government officials have discussed needing temporary classrooms for 5 years. The Department for Education has refused to rule that out. Rachel de Souza has also told Tonight with Andrew Marr she believes more schools will be affected.
Of course, there's more to come because clearly all of the surveys have not been returned, and this will be a process that unfolds. So, I am pleased that rigorous safety has been enforced and that children are physically safe, but I don't think this is the end of the story.
The government has today released the list of schools in England which have been warned about safety concerns. 19 have had to delay the start of the school term, while 4 others have reverted to remote learning. Sarah Skinner is CEO of the Penrose Learning Trust, which has 40 classrooms affected across 3 schools. She's told Andrew it's heartbreaking.
We should be starting a new school year, looking forward, setting the year ahead, and of course we're actually just trying to find spaces to teach children. We know the safest and best way for them to be educated is to be in front of teachers and in school, and it's just devastating to be upsetting families yet again with having to have some children at home.
The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Kyiv getting an update on Ukraine's counter-offensive against the Russian invasion. Western officials are thought to be unhappy at a lack of progress in regaining ground. A British tank given to Ukraine has also been destroyed. But the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Alicia Kearns, has told Andrew Ukrainian forces have made good progress in the last 10 days.
So the assessment I've received is that they have punched through. Now, obviously, there's discussions about how much harder do you punch, because obviously the harder you punch, the more people you lose. Unlike the Russians, the Ukrainians are not willing to just throw their people into a meat grinder, and they don't have as many people.
Legislation that would end historical prosecutions related to the Troubles has passed the Commons. The law change, which is opposed by every political party in Northern Ireland, offers limited immunity to some accused of murder. It also prevents civil prosecutions. And Jenny Amoso has filed a legal complaint after she was kissed on the lips by her boss, Luis Rubiales, at the Women's World Cup. The suspended president of Spain's Football Federation insists it was consensual, which the player rejects. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 11 points at 74.26. The pound buys $1.24 and €1.16. LBC weather mostly dry tonight with a few sharp and thundery showers in the west. Some mist and fog along the coasts, a low of 9. Early showers moving northwards tomorrow, otherwise dry with lots of sunshine, very warm or hot in the southeast, highs of 32 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to the programme. It's Iain Dale here with you until 10. It's 4 minutes past 7. Now, as you know, every month Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, comes in to do a phone-in, taking your calls on what she might do if she were indeed the Chancellor. And I suppose every month that we move towards nearer a general election, her views become increasingly important because Labour still has, 15 to 20 point lead in the polls. So if the election was held tomorrow, Rachel would be sitting in the Treasury the next day. So it's your your chance, really, to quiz the woman who could be in control of our tax and spending within the next year. Everyone seems to think the election will be in October next year, but some people are thinking May, so we might be less than a year away. So, Rachel, welcome. Is there a sense of excitement or slight trepidation about what might lie ahead over the next year?
Well, I've been an MP, as you know, Iain, for over 13 years now, and all of those have been on the opposition benches because Labour has lost the last 4 elections. So there is a sense of excitement that it's within our grasp for the first time, frankly, in the time that I've been a Member of Parliament. Trepidation about what we might inherit if that does come to pass, because every day we get closer to an election, every day we learn more things about the state of the public realm, for example, with the crumbling schools, but also with some of the challenges we face in our NHS with the waiting lists where they are. So I think trepidation about what we are going to uncover if we do win the next election, but the opportunity to serve and to change this country for the better, that's what I came into politics to do. Being on the backbenches and being on the opposition benches is no fun at all, and I want to swap those as soon as possible.
You seem to be having great fun at Prime Minister's questions this morning. You were slapping your thigh and clapping away.
Yes, I did read that earlier. I just find Prime Minister's questions astonishing at times. And you sort of think the Prime Minister lives in a parallel universe, because I sit there through Prime Minister's questions, and whether it is the questions from Keir Starmer or from backbench MPs on either side, and Rishi Sunak's answer basically goes something like this. We've never had so much investment in our schools, and we're very lucky to have this Conservative government. We are world-beating when it comes to the NHS, and everything is going incredibly well. Cost of living crisis, I don't know what you're talking about. We've never helped people so much with their energy bills. And you just think, what world are you living in? I mean, it would laugh if we weren't crying, and today I was trying to embrace the funny side of it, but it does really frustrate me that we've got somebody running the country who seems to have no idea of what it's like for ordinary people on a day-to-day basis at the moment.
So lots of straight and meaty answers from you over the next 45 minutes.
I'll do my best, as I always do.
The number to call, 0345 6060973. You can text 84850, say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and of course you can watch us live on Global Player. Let's go to our first caller. It's from Brent in Derby. Hello, Brent.
Hello and good evening, both. I'm
Hi, Brent.
experienced veteran educator, so I have worked under both many administrations, including Labour and Conservative government. Now, your previous government did do some building work. That's true. However, I'm in the 1965 build, and I am racked with asbestos. And that asbestos is put there by a Labour government of 1965. I get that that's not something I can blame them for, but we have seen a managed decline in educational funding under both administrations, and we have a massive amount of school buildings which are riddled with asbestos. That's the bigger issue regarding RAC. We've seen 147 deaths as a result of asbestos. That's the tip of the iceberg already in education and in medical settings as well. So the big question is, what are you going to do about the general state of schools, not just the RAC, but the actual ventilation systems, the quality of building, the fact that it's costing more to maintain our schools because they're inefficient when it comes to all sorts of things, the fact that the poorest schools in the more deprived areas are worse off. So what can you say us concrete is going to be your new building programme? I remember education in 97. I'm somebody who got to university for free because of a Labour government in 97. I'd like to see something along the lines. What can you do now to tell me, as an educator, is your plan for the future of education in this country?
Well, thank you very much for your question, Brent. And before I went back onto the front bench 3 years ago, I actually chaired in Parliament the Asbestos in Schools group, so I know a little bit about what you are talking about. And the reason that I chaired that group is that my constituency in Leeds, we've experienced one of the highest death rates from asbestos of anywhere in the country, and mesothelioma as well, because of one particular factory that pumped out asbestos. Kids played with it like it was snow, made snowballs out of it and played with it on the streets, and we had a huge number of people who died from asbestos. So I know a little bit about what you are speaking about, and you're right to say that the concrete issue, the RAC issue that we're talking about at the moment is, just one example of the state of our crumbling infrastructure, whether that's in schools or in other parts of public service as well. And I joined the Labour Party in the first place because of my experience at secondary school. My sixth form at my local school, where I went, was 2 prefab huts in the playground, and our library was turned into a classroom because there were more students than space. And there was not a schools building programme when I was at school, because I was at school in the 80s and 90s, and it was a couple of years after I left school that Labour's school building programme built a new sixth form block at my school, and it made a massive, massive difference. So I know the difference that modern, good quality buildings make to our young people, but also to the teachers who work there and make such a difference to our young people's lives. Now, look, I want to ensure that we deal firstly with the problem we're confronted with today, so that kids can get back to school, because although I complain about what happened when I was at school, at the beginning of every term we did return to school because we didn't have ceilings that were literally caving in on us. So we need to deal with this immediate problem now. The Chancellor has said that he will do whatever it takes to get our schools in the state that they need to be. I will hold him to account for that over the next few months until the election comes, and then ahead of the next election we will set out our plans. Now, I'm not in a position to say at the moment how much this is going to even cost, because the government haven't released those numbers. But I hope what you hear from me, Brent, is somebody who's absolutely committed to our young people and to our education system, because I know the difference that good quality buildings make to young people when they're growing up and going to school.
Well, when Ed Balls was Education Secretary, he had this Building Schools for the Future programme, which I think would have cost £56 billion over a prolonged period of time. Now, Michael Gove scrapped that, one of the first things the Coalition did. Will you guarantee to restore that programme if you're in government?
Well, look, we'll set out all the spending proposals in a properly costed and funded way ahead of the election. But one of the reasons we are in this mess today is that, and actually Brent made this point, is that we haven't been maintaining and looking after our infrastructure, including our schools. And so now we're in a position, the irony of it is that it's going to end up costing more if we had have actually looked after and maintained our school buildings. But we'll set out all those plans. But I hope you can tell that I'm somebody that understands the importance of good schools for our young people.
But given what you said about chairing the all-party group on asbestos in schools, you could make a firm commitment to do something about that. I mean, that wouldn't presumably cost billions of pounds to do something about.
Well, it's one of these things where when I was chairing that group, one of the things we wanted to get from government is an audit of schools so that we understand the scale of the problem. And you can see now with the RAC issue why that is so important, because if we don't know the scale of the problem, it is very difficult to know what needs to be done.
But do you have a rough idea? I mean, given you were chair of that all-party group, you must have a rough idea of what it would cost.
We don't even know how many
rectify it.
schools are affected by it, because the government has not done the work to establish that. That's one of the things that we were calling for.
But they have done the work on this concrete issue, haven't they?
Well, no, they haven't.
Well,
I mean, we only found out today what schools, but the Prime Minister stood up today.
They sent out a letter to all schools asking them to fill in a form and return it. Now, some schools didn't do that. I don't understand why a school wouldn't do that. But in Labour-run Wales, they haven't even sent out a survey, so they don't know what's going on.
But one of the reasons why the schools are in a challenging situation, in Leeds, where I'm an MP, more than 100 schools were potentially at risk. And the surveyors and the contractors to do this work, with just a few days' notice or whatever, just weren't available. And that is part of the reason why we're now sort of playing catch-up, because the government haven't been doing the basics on keeping on top of these problems. And yet they've known about it, not the individual schools, but the government have known about this, at least since 2018, when that previous disaster only didn't injure people because it happened when children weren't at school.
Let's go back to Brent, because Brent, are you satisfied with that answer?
No, I'd like some concrete, pun intended, concrete plans from the Labour government. I'm sorry, that's such a politician answer. That's a vague answer. I'm working in education for 20 years. I am tired, like many in my profession. I would like the Labour government to stand again with the unions, which they used to do, in the health and safety of the workers and the children in schools. Unfortunately, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party knew from 2018, 5 years was long enough, Rachel, to get something organised for a plan if you're going to be in government.
And we raised this issue, Brent, in an opposition day debate in Parliament. There are certain days in Parliament where we get to set the agenda and what is debated, and we put one of those aside to debate the problems of the crumbling school infrastructure. We had another debate in Parliament today where we called a vote for the government to publish all the information about what they knew and when and what action has been taken. So, look, we want to get the information out there so we understand the scale of the problem and not pulling the wool over people's eyes. But we are also, as an opposition party, in the situation where we don't know the full extent of the problem, but we do know that after 13 years of Conservative government, our schools are literally caving in,
but I think
putting children at risk.
Brent wants to know what you're going to do about it. And I think that this is a problem that we see time and time again with Labour shadow cabinet members to say, well, look, we want to do this, but we can't give a commitment ahead of an election. It doesn't really wash with the electorate.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying ahead of the election, we will set all that out. But if I came on the programme this evening, Iain, if I came on the programme this evening and said, I know how much this is going to cost, and I can tell you how I'm going to fix it, that would be a lie. And you would rightly pick me up on it because we don't know how much it's going to cost. We don't know how many schools are affected. Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, was on this programme earlier, or on LBC earlier, and said this is not the end of it. There will be more examples. So, it would be wrong of me to come in and say, I've got all the answers and I can explain how I'm going to fix this mess. That's why we're trying to get the bottom
Jeremy Hunt
of
is
the state
saying,
of this.
well, I will provide the money, whatever it takes.
Yes, and I said right at the beginning of my answer to Brent, and we will hold him to account over the next few months, and then we hope to have the chance to fix this in government. Now, look, I've already given one example that shows Labour's priorities when it comes to education funding. Labour have said, I have said, that we would put VAT on private school fees and we would use that money to invest in our state schools because that is what we think the priority is. Now, the government say that's anti-aspiration. I tell you what is anti-aspiration. It is telling parents and children with 5 days' notice that they can't go back to school at the beginning of term. That's just one choice that a Labour government would make different from the Conservatives to put money where it belongs into the education of all of our children in our state schools.
Lots of calls coming in on lots of different subjects. We'll come to them in just a moment. It's 17 minutes past 7.
LBC.
Dread.
leading Britain's conversation. Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
19 minutes past 7 on LBC. We have Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, with us taking your calls and texts. Here's one. Does Rachel think Gillian Keegan, the Education Secretary, should be sacked?
Well, she's not had a good week, has she? I want the whole lot of them out. Bridget Phillipson as our Education Secretary, because I think that she would do an absolutely brilliant job. I think one thing about all these different ministers you've had, and we've had, it's been a merry-go-round at the Department for Education, so many different Education Secretaries. But one thing they've all got in common is over the last 4 years, they have all underspent on capital budgets. £1.4 billion in the last 4 years hasn't been spent. It's money allocated by the Treasury, but they didn't get it out of the door. And now we know that we've got schools that were in desperate need of investment. If I was the Chancellor, I would be saying to the ministers, you've got the money, you should be spending it. What is going on? Why can you not manage your department to get that money spent?
Over that period, I think that's a 7% underspend, which, it's 1.4 billion, sounds a huge amount of money, and it is. But 7% underspend. If you were Chancellor now, you'd probably be congratulating them for not spending all the money, wouldn't you?
I think if I said to all my colleagues, you could have a 7% increase in your budgets, they would all bite my hands off. So 7% is a significant sum of money, £1.4 billion that could have and should have been spent in improving, rebuilding our schools. If that had been spent, we wouldn't be in the mess we are in today.
Right, let's go to Helena, who's a first-time caller in Nottingham. Helena, hello, what would you like to ask?
Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Helena.
Hi, I've got a question. I've got a quote here from a pretty prominent economist, and they say that Labour need to provide an alternative to aggressive policies being prioritised by the Conservative. The banks and those earning more than £100,000 could quite easily contribute a little more, and unless they do, inequality and poverty will inevitably soar in the months and years ahead. Do you agree with that statement?
The way that I believe that you can reduce inequality, reduce poverty, and actually also improve the living standards of ordinary working people, not in poverty, but struggling to get by, is through growing the economy. Because that is the way that we can ensure that working people have more money in their pockets and we have more money for public services. And one of the real failures over these last 13 years is to grow our economy in all parts of the country, creating those good quality, high-paid jobs. So my priority is to get that economic growth back in our economy, to lift people out of poverty and to have the money we need to invest in our schools and our hospitals and so much else of the public realm, which has been, decimated, frankly, by this Conservative government.
Well, let's bring in another caller who's got a similar point to make. Phil in Broadstairs. Hello, Phil.
Good evening, Ian. Hello, Rachel. Yes,
Hi, Phil.
In sort of answer to that last call, or adding to it, you said you came into politics to change things, and yet all I've heard from you and the front bench is Tory policies for a Tory crisis. You're not going to tax wealth. You're not going to do much with income tax. You're leaving the profits of the banks, the water and the energy untouched. I remember very well, because I was born in that period, the Attlee government. And what they came in with was a four-letter word, hope. You aren't communicating hope. There is no ambition in evidence in what you're doing. And they had a much harder job than you've got to rebuild the country after the Second World War. COVID is bad. 2008 was terrible. But austerity has to be stopped. And you seem to be wanting to carry on worshipping the Treasury, because you are an ex-banker, Bank of England banker, and you don't seem to be in making any kind of ambition clear to me as a voter, or the public as voters, whether you're prepared to rise to these challenges, which are far worse than what we had in World War II.
So what's your actual question?
Well, the question is, why are you employing Tory policies to deal with a Tory crisis?
Well, just going back to Helena's question, the economist that she quoted, that was actually you.
Well, look, I want to reduce poverty and inequality. I didn't go into politics, but how do you do that? What are the practical things that we can do?
Well, your suggestion in that quote was to tax the banks more and those earning more than £100,000 more, but you've gone back on that.
Well, look, the way that I think that we can lift people out of poverty and reduce inequality, as I say, is to get the economy growing, and that has been the missing ingredient these last 13 years. Now, Phil sort of says, oh, I'm an ex-banker. Yes, I am an ex-Bank of England economist, and the the one thing I learned more than anything at the Bank of England is your sums have always got to add up. And what we saw less than a year ago was a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who decided to throw that very simple truth that your sums have got to add up out of the window. And where does that leave us?
First anniversary of Liz Truss today.
First anniversary today. And the damage that was done in those 44 or whatever it is, short days, is immense. And that damage was done because she thought the rules of economics didn't apply to her, and so did Kwasi Kwarteng. And we have paid a heavy price for that experiment. And I will never play fast and loose with the public finances, because the people who pay the consequences of that are ordinary working people and some of the poorest people in society who are now facing higher rents, higher mortgages, almost the collapse of the UK pension market because of their ideological experiment. And I will never do that. That responsibility, fiscal and economic stability, always has to come first, and it will with me.
But if you're just going to follow Tory economic policy, what's the point of voting Labour?
Well, you know, we've said that we would get rid of the non-dom tax status. I haven't heard Rishi Sunak calling for that. I wonder why. We've said that there would be VAT on private school fees, and we would put that money where it belongs, in our state schools. We've said that private equity bosses, their income should be taxed as income and not capital gains, and we'll put that money into our public services. And we've said that we would have a proper windfall tax on the huge profits that the energy companies are making and help with the cost of living crisis.
Said
none of the Tories wouldn't do any of those things.
You're not going to increase income tax for the so-called rich. You're not going to increase capital gains tax. You're not going to increase inheritance tax. You're not going to introduce a wealth tax, even though Michael Gove is now speculating about that. I mean, you're more right-wing than Michael Gove.
Oh, give me strength. I mean, I haven't heard any Conservative member of the Cabinet saying, do you know what, Rachel's ideas on, cracking down on this loophole for non-doms, which brings in, by the way, £3.5 billion a year, or the £1.4 billion you could bring in
economists dispute that.
Well, look, the number on the non-doms comes from analysis of HMRC data from the LSE and Warwick
But they might well
University.
just leave the country, so you might not have any of that money at all.
This takes into account people's behavioural changes, Iain. The Institute for Fiscal Studies have backed up Labour's numbers on how much you would bring in from putting VAT on private school fees. And you could bring in billions of pounds by closing the loopholes, which mean that the big energy companies can get out of paying the so-called windfall tax that the government have introduced. So, I'm just not buying this idea.
What's happened to
we have
Rachel Reeves?
I'm sorry, let me just say this. I'm not buying this idea that our policies are somehow the same as the Conservatives. They're just not. But what I will not apologise for is making sure that our numbers add up, because unless you can do that, it will be ordinary people and the public services that we rely on that will pay the price for it.
So the Rachel Reeves who said that quote, the banks and those earning more than 100,000 could quite easily contribute a little bit more. That's a very different Rachel Reeves than the one I've got sitting in front of me.
Well, look, my priority, and I make no apology for that either, is that I want to grow the economy, because it is through growing the economy that you can sustainably improve people's living standards and have the money that our public services desperately need.
Right, let's go to another caller. It's Nick in Oxshott in Surrey. Hello, Nick.
Hello, good evening. Do you intend to leave inheritance tax as it is? Or if not, how do you propose to change it?
I don't have any plans to change inheritance tax. I've heard some people speculate that the Conservatives might get rid of it entirely. I think that would be the wrong thing to do, because it brings in between £5 and £10 billion every year. And at the moment, you can already pass on, as a married couple, a property worth £1 million without any inheritance tax at all. And I think less than 5% of estates pay any inheritance tax whatsoever. So I think that it is fair to have a progressive inheritance tax system. It brings in a lot of money. And, when some Conservatives on the right of their party say, we should get rid of it, well, they never say how you're going to make up for that £8 billion. Is it going to be taxes on ordinary working people? Is it going to be less money for our schools and our hospitals? So, I don't have plans to make big changes.
When you say I don't have plans, I always think that's a bit of a get-out clause, because you may not have plans now, but you could the day after the election.
I don't have plans for the day after the election to make those changes.
Would you categorically rule out changing the inheritance tax system?
No, No, I'm not going to say that a Labour government would never make any of those changes, but I don't subscribe to this Conservative idea that we should just do away with it altogether. I think that would be the wrong thing to do, and it would leave a huge black hole in our public finances.
Would you categorically rule out a rise in VAT
I'm
rates?
not going to sit here and write a Labour manifesto and a first Labour budget in your studio, but Keir and me have both said on many occasions we would like
you've
taxes.
ruled out a wealth tax. Why can't you rule out a rise in VAT?
Keir and I have said on many occasions we want taxes on ordinary working people to be lower. I do not wake up in the morning think about how I could increase taxes on working people. We'll set out all of those plans. I'm not writing a budget on LBC, but I do not want working people to pay any more in tax than they do today.
They want to know what the direction of travel is.
Well, the direction
and before the last election, the Conservatives made clear that they would stick to the triple lock system on pensions.
And we have done that.
Well, you've done that. So why can't you rule out a rise in VAT then? It's a very simple thing to do, I would have thought, if you don't want to increase tax.
When we make announcements, we do it in our own way, in our own time. But we've been very clear, the tax increases that we're proposing, there are three of them. Getting rid of the non-dom tax status, having VAT on private school fees, and changing the way in which carried interest for private equity firms are taxed. Those are the tax increases to fund the specific things, more investment in our schools and our NHS that we've set out, and we do not have other plans to increase taxes.
They would bring in, well, you tell me, but if you add those three up together, I don't think it would come to more than 6, 7, 8 billion. Now, you're not going to be able to reform our public services with an extra 6, 7, 8 billion. Everyone agrees that a lot of our public services are crumbling, but people know that it will take a lot more than that to improve them. So you've got to give, surely, even this far out from an election, you've got to give people an idea of which direction of travel you're going in, because you either borrow more or you tax more. There is no other way of doing it.
No, there is, Iain, and this is the really important point that I'm trying to get across. You've got to grow the economy. It's why we've said we'll reform the planning system. It's why we've said that we will improve our trading relationship with our nearest neighbours and trading partners within the European Union. It's why we've said we would invest alongside business in British industry. It's why we'll reform the apprenticeship levy so it better works for businesses to skill up our young people and those wanting to retrain. That is the way that you improve living standards and get the money for public services. And why do I say that? Because that is what has happened in the past when we've had money to invest in public services. It comes through growing the economy with a serious plan to do just that.
Right, we will take more of your questions in just a moment with Rachel Reeves. It's 7:32 News Headlines with Amelia Cox.
Counter-terror police have alerted ports and airports about a terror suspect who has escaped from prison. 21-year-old Daniel Abed Khalif went on the run in his cook's uniform from HMP Wandsworth this morning. The Children's Commissioner has told LBC rebuilding schools as a result of the concrete crisis will take years. It's understood government officials have been discussing the use of temporary classrooms for up to 5 years. And Spanish player Jenny Hermoso has filed a legal complaint against Luis Rubiales over his conduct at the World Cup final. The suspended president of the country's FA kissed her on the lips at the trophy presentation in Sydney. LBC weather mostly dry tonight with a few sharp and thundery showers in the west. Some mist and fog along the coasts, a low of 9 degrees.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973.
Oh, we have Michelle. Let's have Michelle.
7:35 on LBC. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is here answering your questions. Let's go to Michelle in Malvern. Hello, Michelle.
Hello there. Hi, Ian. Hi, Rachel.
Hello, Michelle.
Here's my question. How excited are you that you are going to be the first female Chancellor in the UK?
Oh, thank you, Michelle.
Well, Keir could change his mind. You never know.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Michelle. No, it's not everyone might know this, but we've had a Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK for 800 years, and for all of those 800 years, that role has been occupied by a man. I've shadowed 4 different Chancellors of the Exchequer since I've been in this role. They get through them quite quickly these days. But yeah, it's always been a man, and it is one of the few glass ceilings still to smash in politics, and I really hope I get that opportunity, and I would take that responsibility seriously, because there are still plenty of inequalities still in society. Women on average are paid something like 15% less than men. There's a big barrier, especially when it comes to childcare, for women accessing good jobs, paying decent wages. And if I have that privilege to be the first female Chancellor of the Exchequer, I want to use that as a way to do, in a way, finish off what Barbara Castle started in 1970 when the Equal Pay Act was introduced, to reduce those gender inequalities and to help women, particularly women with young children, to get the jobs that are commensurate with their abilities and ensure that they can fulfil their potential. So I am excited about it. I hope I get that opportunity, but also not complacent, because it's still a way to go until the next election. No one has cast a vote yet. So just for myself as well, not to get carried away by the prospect. But it is an exciting one, Michelle, absolutely.
But it's also a big responsibility, not just because of the nature of the job, but to be the first woman, you've kind of got to be a success. You don't want, in sort of 5-10 years' time, people saying, oh, well, of course, we always knew a woman wasn't up to the job of being Chancellor. It's far too difficult for those poor little ladies. You don't want anybody to write that, do you?
No, there's a quote from one of the first women to become an MP, and she said that I'm doing this not just for myself, but also to show that we can do this. And that's a great weight on my shoulders, she said. And of course, you feel some of that. I think it might have been Margaret Bonfield.
She was the first ever Labour cabinet minister.
She was one of the first 3 Labour women to get elected in 1923, and then the first woman to serve as a minister, and then the first woman to serve in the cabinet. And it is a real responsibility, absolutely. Of course, you know, I take that responsibility, as I said to Michelle, very seriously. But I also hope that in that role I would be a role model, especially to young women setting out on their careers. You know, when I was growing up, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. Now, I disagreed with almost everything she did, Michelle, but she was there doing that job. And as a young girl and as a teenager, I never doubted that women could rise to the top. And so, in a funny way, you know, my generation were all Thatcher's children. Some of us, some people want to emulate her, others rebelled against it. But I do think there is a special responsibility as a woman to provide that leadership and that inspiration to the nation as well.
I won't tell Jackie Smith you missed her out.
Oh, the brilliant Jackie Smith as well. Well, she was the first female Home Secretary.
Absolutely. Right, Rob in Huddersfield has a text question. He says, can you commit to funding our prisons properly? They're all overcrowded and now prisoners are sneaking out because they're understaffed too. There was a story, I think, in the papers today about Germany refusing to extradite someone to this country because of the state of our prisons.
Well, they're welcome to keep them. There's also a terrible story today about somebody who has escaped from prison, in prison for terrorism offences, and escaped from prison in Wandsworth. And, you know, we don't know all the details of that case yet. That's incredibly serious. I have a prison, actually, in my constituency in Leeds, Armley Jail. And so, you know, again, I've, you know, on a few occasions as a Member of Parliament, been in to meet the prison governor and know a little bit about the condition in prisons and have huge respect for people who work in those prisons. But I know as well that the conditions of some of our prisons, including for the people who work in there, are not in the state they need to be. And I'm very concerned about this incident today of somebody who should be, convicted for terrorism under heavy security, managing to escape, and we need to get to the bottom of what on earth went on there.
Right, Sarah has texted in to say, can you ask Rachel, my son has a place at a private school in 2 years' time. However, we have 3 children and cannot afford 20% more across the school fees. We have a state school nearby, but it's oversubscribed. How will Labour prepare the state schools to take so many extra children? Also, in the private system, we take on the cost of our son's special needs support. Will Labour fund children's services more to support the state schools picking up these additional costs? Now, that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because Bridget Phillipson, your colleague, the Shadow Education Secretary, she doesn't seem to believe there'll be any extra children go from private schools to state schools if you put VAT on school fees. Now, Sarah is an example of somebody who's saying, well, we will have to.
Well, if you look at the study that the Institute for Fiscal Studies did just a couple of months ago, they say that if you look at the evidence of what's happened to fees at private schools over the last 10, 20 years, there doesn't seem to be much of a drop-off in the numbers going. In fact, the numbers have increased, despite the fact that fees at private schools have increased by much more than inflation.
Yeah, but incrementally over the years, not a 20% hike in one go.
The Institute for Fiscal Studies, who, I'm an economist, but they're full of really bright economists, have done this work and said that they expect very few people. Now, part of the reason is that private schools, if they really want to keep people, can find ways to help. Now, you'll remember in 1997, and the last Labour government got rid of assisted places. Now, the private schools at the time said, well, we won't be able to offer scholarships if there's not the assisted places scheme. Well, actually, the number of scholarships to private schools has increased over that period of time because they did find ways to raise the money to allow bright kids from less privileged backgrounds to go. So I'm not convinced.
This isn't going to help. I mean, putting up the fees by 20%, that's not going to help private schools increase the number of scholarships, is it?
Well, what I'm saying is that last time there was reform to funding for private schools, the private schools said one thing and actually the very opposite happened. And I expect that private schools will do what they can to help parents who find themselves in difficult circumstances. But the whole point of this increase in VAT is to have the money to invest in our state schools, because I do agree with Sarah that our state schools are in desperate need of funding. 93% of our children go to state schools and they need to be better funded. And this is a way to get money from, well,
without abolishing that policy, what about doing it gradually? So instead of having 20% in one go, you do it incrementally over the first term of a Labour government.
Well, the first question we had today, and rightly so, from Brent in Derby, was about the fact that we've got asbestos in schools, we've got schools riddled with concrete that is at risk of collapsing. So I don't think we can wait for 5 years to get more money into our state schools. I want to get that money into our state schools now, and that is what this policy does.
Tom is in Glasgow. Hello, Tom.
Hi, Rachel. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Hi, Tom.
And because there's going to be the Glasgow Rutherglen by-election is going to be a big thing, and I've seen the candidate. And I'm sorry to take up your time, but I'm pretty scared. I've got autism and I've got spinal stenosis, and I'm scared about the changes that Mill Stride is making, the work capability assessment. That's why I'm hoping a Labour government gets in. What's your view on this, Rachel? If I may be permitted to ask you that.
Well, Tom, I'm really sorry that, on top of the challenges that you face with your autism, that you're also going through, this time of uncertainty and fear about what the changes mean for you. One of the worries I've always had about the way assessments are done for disability benefits is that some disabilities are quite hard to assess, and the impact that it has on your ability to work. Now, we've just appointed, Keir Starmer has just appointed a new Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Liz Kendall, somebody who's got a lot of experience working in government for the last Labour government in these areas. but I want to ensure that people who are not able to work have the support that they need, but actually more importantly, the many disabled people who want to work but don't get the support are given that help, because there are so many people, and I don't know, Tom, the situation you're in, but there are so many people who I talk to who have got disabilities, but if the right adjustments are made in the workplace, they are able to work, they are able to contribute, have huge skills, but often feel shut out of the workplace. So I would want to make sure that you have the support you need. If that support is to help you into work, brilliant. If that is not an option for you, that you have the dignity that you deserve, and that is what I would promise as an incoming Labour government would deliver for you, Tom.
Rachel, we've run out of time, I'm afraid.
Oh my gosh.
I know. We'll have you back next month, though. Maybe from the Labour Party conference, I don't know. But
That's a good point.
We will see you again very soon. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you to all your callers and to you, Ian.
Well, not at all. Pleasure to have you. Now, coming up at 8 o'clock, it's Cross Question. We've cleared the ball. The lines are open for all Cross Question. 0345 6060 973. We have the Chairman of the Conservative Party, Greg Hands. We have Layla Moran from the Liberal Democrats, the political commentator Dan Hodges, and the lawyer Charlotte Proudman. They'll be here to take your calls. It's 7:46.
This is LBC.
Supply.
Iain Dale. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
It's 10 to 8. Now, after 8 this evening, we have tonight's edition of Cross Question. On the panel, we have the Chairman of the Conservative Party, Greg Hands, the Lib Dems Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Layla Moran, the Mail on Sunday columnist, Dan Hodges, and the human rights barrister, Dr. Charlotte Proudman. Now, before we come to that, today marks 1 year since a certain Liz Truss became Prime Minister. Now, we all remember just how well things went for her in Number 10 during the weeks which followed. And this sorry tale is laid out in the book Out of the Blue by the journalists Harry Cole and James Heal. They joined me on my book club podcast, which you can find on Global Player, and we began the conversation by their recollections of the Truss premiership 1 year ago today, with how the vanquished Rishi Sunak reacted to the Tory leadership contest.
she won fair and square, and he said that very clear. He did his valedictory in the FT, and lots of people around him didn't, but Sunak himself exited the stage for a good 4 weeks.